we welcome Anil Gupta, who is INSEAD's Chair Professor of Strategy. He joins us from Singapore to tell us what he thinks these important points might be. Now, Professor Gupta is one of the world's experts on strategy, globalization, emerging markets, and has been an advisor to the U.S.-India Business Council. And he joins us this morning on Morning Call. Professor Gupta, thank you so much for sharing your time. Let's talk about Geithner's visit, shall we? Because what are the important topics on the table here? We have that nuclear deal. It looks like bonds and financial markets might be talked about as well. But what do you think he'll strike in terms of an accord here?
I think that, the good thing is that bulk of the issues that are on the table between U.S. and India really pertain to economic issues. It's a very healthy relationship. It's a very strong relationship. But at the same time, it's an interesting game that's being played because it's a multipolar world. And for India, U.S. is one of the most important partnerships. But at the same time, China and India have a bigger trade linkage than China and India. India and Russia, India and the European Union. So I think for Mr. Geithner in India, at a top level, the big issue will be to make sure that U.S. Remains in India's, let's say, favorite trading and investment partner.
Now, Professor Gupta, it's interesting that you're bringing up China, of course. I spoke to another a professor and economist earlier today who also said that the timing of this trip is pretty interesting because it could be symbolic, showing China that, hey, you're not the only big game in town in the Asia-Pac.
Yes, it is. In fact, because Mr. Putin was in India, just a few days back. So this is a perfect illustration of the multipolar nature of the world. And I think, despite the fact that, and I tend to believe that the U.S.-India relationship is very strong and it's only going to get stronger. But despite that, I think it will be in India's interests to make sure that the U.S. is not the only player that, in fact, it is close to. India wants to get very close to China economically, and of course, similarly with Europe and Russia. And I think Mr. Geithner, I'm pretty sure, realizes that. But at the same time, I think it makes sense for U.S. and India to work very closely. Some of the, fortunately, from a U.S. point of view, currency is not an issue in the dialogue with India, but trade and investment are. Indian market is closed, or let's say relatively closed, or maybe completely closed to certain industries where the U.S. Would indeed like to have a much bigger presence in India, or U.S. companies, for example, insurance. So Indian regulations currently do not permit foreign companies, foreign insurers to own more than 26% equity. And I think India is on a track to open that up. Increase the limits.
And financial regulation as well, Professor Gupta. You're right. I mean, financial regulation and also foreign investors being able to invest in Indian stock markets. That must be high up on the agenda.
Yes, although I think that in terms of foreign investors being able to invest in Indian stock markets, that's generally, I would say, foreign institutional money finds it relatively easy to go into India. I think that's really not so much of an issue, but according to Indian Prime Minister, and I think he put it rightly, that from 2012 to 2017, for example, India would need about $1 trillion of investment in infrastructure. And so, of course, India has a very high rate of domestic saving, but still going to need foreign money. It's going to need American money. It's going to need Chinese money and European money. And I think, therefore, it's good for India to open up its insurance sector.
And wouldn't you say, Professor Gupta, that India really has been overshadowed in the Asia-Pac, considering the strength and the size of China's economy? I think it's at twice the size of India. So, it looks like India has been put on the back burner by a lot of major economies.
I think that's fair to say, because China actually is 3.5 times that of India. So, if it comes to an economic contest between China and India, China wins, hands down. But at the same time, we need to realize that China is not the whole world. And, clearly China is very important, perhaps the most important emerging story in the world. But after China, India is the second most important emerging story in the world. And, the world is big enough. And, it is multipolar, and it's getting increasingly multipolar. So therefore, even true. China needs India just as India needs China.
Okay, Professor Gupta, thank you for sharing your time today. That's Anil Gupta, INSEAD's Chair Professor of Strategy.